Hey everybody, welcome to the very first Unstoppable Genius Live. I am so grateful to have you all joining us on a Friday of all days. Late on a Friday too, it's pretty late on a Friday. So welcome to Unstoppable Genius Live. This is the first time we've done something like this. This is a new series that we're trying out at Glide, talking to the folks who are putting Glide to work to solve real problems. I'm Andy Claremont, the head of community here at Glide. And I'm thrilled to be here with you guys. Now, one thing before we get into it, though, I just want to make a point that this isn't a webinar. We don't have a bunch of slides to go through. We're not doing anything like that. This is a conversation, and y'all are part of it. So while I have a list of items to talk about with our guests, at any time you can jump into the chat with your questions, and I'll pull those in, and we'll have time at the end to talk through that as well. Now, with all that out of the way, I would love to say welcome to our guests, Brian Banks, Cliff Switzer from Lone Star Communications. Y'all, we've been doing a lot of stuff together over the last couple of months. We had you on the blog as one of our first featured customer stories. We're at Field Service Palm Springs last month. There's just a whole lot going on. So hey guys, thanks for joining us again here.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This is a great way to end the week, going into a Friday. So it's refreshing to be on, and love working with Glide.
Absolutely, I'm going to echo what Cliff said, and thank you for even having us. It's quite a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Of course. Love chatting with you guys. And the first thing I want to start off with is just getting a feel for Lone Star. Lone Star Communications, you guys are based down in Texas. Brian, if you want to tell me a little bit about Lone Star, who are you guys? What do you do? What problems are you solving for your customers?
Well, actually, we're in two verticals. We're in the healthcare vertical and the K-12 education vertical. For K-12, we do critical threat management systems. And in healthcare, we basically responsible for the patient nurse call systems. So yeah, if you're in the hospital and you're pressing a button, that particular system is what we're responsible for installing and upkeeping.
So if someone hits the button, all the little signals, all the tech tied to that, you guys are responsible for it.
Absolutely. A lot of those systems, due to the nature of data these days, are connected to so many other systems within the hospitals. So those data points, at the end of the day, our jobs are the attempts to make the patient experience much, much better.
And can you tell me a little bit about, give me an example of some of those setups? You had a really good one when we were chatting down in Palm Springs about even get down to the tracking nurses moving through hospital hallways. Like, what sort of tech are we talking about here?
I can jump in real quick.
Please.
So we basically in the hospitals, we like Brian said, we install the call button that calls the nurses, but there's a lot more to that. There's a lot more workflow. So when that patient presses the button, we have to know where that call is going to go, like which nursing station. Does it go to their wireless phone? Does it go to a centralized call center? So if it's a code button, they may want that to go centralized so that the code team can show up. And so there's a lot of needs assessments that happen on the clinical side with the people that work there to figure out the traffic. Once we do that, then it gets into the analytical side where they want to know, what's the response time to calls? On the night shift, are they responding to calls within a minute? And then maybe on another shift, it's 2 minutes, and they can figure out which units actually have the higher response rate. What's the response to falls in the hospital? And then we get into the cool integrations, I like to say, is real-time locating systems. So that's where a staff member could be wearing a real-time locating badge that's using RF or radio frequency or infrared light. And there's an infrastructure there. So when the nurse walks in the room, it actually will register that they're in the room and then activate the dome light outside the room to show maybe a color. So if they're an RN, it may be green. And if they're an aide, it may be orange. Or if it's a housekeeper, it may be yellow. It all depends on how we set the workflows up. And then we can actually timestamp those events. And then there's also ways where we can display the caregiver's name on the TV screen. So that way, as a family member, when you come and you say, well, did they take care of my mom or my dad or whatever, they can see on the screen every time a nurse's caregiver's entered the room with timestamps. So, and then it gets a little bit more complicated where we're integrating into a lot more technology in the room. But it really starts with the base foundation of that nurse call communication system. And it's kind of like Glide. You layer actions on top of your app. So that's what we're kind of doing, is layering actions on a nurse call system.
I love that. And going between the real physical world and all the hardware and tech involved there into software, a bunch of data coming out of that. Be real interested in seeing how you guys are plugging this all together. Cliff, I want to stick with you for a second. Would love to hear a little bit about your backstory and how did Glide enter your life? How did you find out about Glide?
So I've been doing this for 26 years. So I started out as a technician. I was out in the field pulling cable, installing systems. So all this technology we're talking about, I started off in my 20s. And so did that, moved into engineering, and I was actually designing the systems and helping quote the systems. Then moved into sales, and then eventually basically do what I do today. I do a lot of innovation, but our company was acquired at the end of we were with Halco Life Safety Systems when our company was acquired by Lone Star, and Lone Star's just slowly been growing and acquiring more dealers like ourselves. I don't even know where my train of thought went somewhere else.
It's all good.
But yeah, I've been doing this a long time, and innovation is kind of my forte, because I know most of the vendors, and I know how to connect to those vendors, and then I know what the customers have and how we need to connect to their data when we're in these hospital systems.
Nice. And you were the one who brought Glide initially to Lone Star, right? Do I remember that correctly?
Correct. I'm kind of known to think a little bit outside the box. So I'm always looking for something that we can use internally that can basically condense a workflow. I mean, my job is to go into hospitals and help them with workflows, right? So if we have a workflow in our own office, it just makes sense that if it's like 7 steps to do something, if we could find something that would actually shorten time, increase communication, educate people faster. That's what we're looking for. So I was dabbling in app development. I don't watch a lot of Netflix, and I don't do a lot of that stuff. I'm basically a nighttime nerd, and I'm constantly looking for tech. So that's how I kind of made my way into the Glide world.
Gotcha.
How can we take some of this data and put it in an app form?
And you brought Glide to Brian, if I remember correctly. And Brian, I will switch over to you here. I'd love to hear your backstory and then your reaction to Glide the first time you saw it.
Okay, so our company decided to bring together the most innovative people they thought were in the company. This is about 300 people. So that's how I first met Cliff. I've been working for Lone Star for 17 years. I'd heard of him, but I never met him. And so in that meeting, they gave us the ability to form this little group and give ourselves our own name. So we came up with the DOD, the Division or Department of Disruption. And so in that process, we started talking about what could we do to either be a disruption in our industry, or what could people do to disrupt us? And Cliff and I both immediately said, man, we really need to empower our technicians internally. And that at that point is when I really initially heard Cliff, and I said in the form of an app. And I had actually already been doing some things. I write code for our company, so I had already been doing some things. And I kind of showed that to Cliff, and Cliff says, well, hey, have you seen Glide? And I said, no, I've never heard of it. He goes, yeah, it's this development area that, you really don't have to have any coding. And the moment he said that, I was like, oh no, this is not going to work. But because of who I heard Cliff was, I listened, and he actually started showing it to me, and I was like, wow, man, this is really interesting, because again, I've been used to writing code in Swift, Xcode, and things like that, and here he is, he's making something almost, with no coding background. So that got my interest immediately.
I love hearing the stories of when people first discover Glide, and especially folks like yourself, like where you have a technical background, you have development experience, you know how to build things out by jumping into the editor and writing code, and you're kind of like, Glide, sure, maybe.
Right.
But then you start playing with it and you come around.
Right.
What other, out of curiosity, did you experiment with other platforms before settling on Glide?
Yeah, because once he brought that to my attention, I went to Google and I said, man, no code, low code, what is this? And I was really surprised that I'd really not even heard about it. And I guess I was just that engraved into what we had been doing. So I actually started searching. I was like, man, what is out there? So I looked at several others, and we actually created a few projects in that. But the problem was Cliff is a UI guy, and I'm more of an integrator. And in those other platforms, we could not find a common ground where we could actually work together within it. And Glide became like that meeting ground where, here's a guy who's been in sales and marketing and design and an integrator. And it just intuitively, I can't explain it, but it just intuitively worked. And we were able to create something, almost I want to say it was a week. And we rolled it out to everyone like within 10 days.
It was the next meeting. We already had some prototypes built. That's kind of the thing with Glide. Like if you start building stuff, you can actually take ideas from your other apps. So we had some other stuff built, but we're like, hey, let's throw this thing together for the next meeting, and then we'll present it in the next meeting to see if this is the direction that this group wants to take. Because we didn't know what the DoD was going to even do when we first met. It was just a concept. Let's just get a bunch of smart people together. So we came back to that next meeting, and I think what the base Techstar app really was just one product line and spec sheets and pictures of the devices. It was very simplistic. But that simplicity was infectious after that meeting. The ability to, I might be getting ahead of myself here, but just the ability to click a spec sheet, click a part, and then get to a spec sheet within like 2 or 3 clicks. That was a game changer, because that's not how we operate out in the field.
So that very first version of Techstar, and that's the name you mentioned, that's the name of the app, right? The internal Lone Star app.
Mm-hmm.
That first version was basically a catalog in your pocket. Yeah, like here's all the spec sheets, all the information about this specific product line. What was the reaction like from the team? Like they just saw that. That's all it was at first. But what was the reaction like from the field techs?
When we actually rolled it out to the field techs, we really didn't even. This is what's crazy. We really didn't even do like a company broadcast. We sort of just kind of told like a few people, a few technicians in the field, and it was like lighting a match to a hayfield, because everybody. Our traditional way that Cliff always tells the story of how we used to access information was so archaic that it was tough, and it just took time. And those techs are looking for efficient ways to do more tickets, because that's how they get raises, and that's how they get promotions. And so when this actually hit, word of mouth, hey man, have you tried Techstar? Hey, and this is literally what we were hearing. Can you add me to the app? Can you add me to the app? Can you add me to the app? And initially, I think that first it was, I don't remember exactly how many on our first, but it was unbelievable. And that alone was what we showed the C-level.
Yeah, just that adoption. Cliff.
Yeah. I'll kind of tell the backstory real quick, but the technicians literally, if you get a new tech that comes in, you got to get them a username and a password to the manufacturer's site, and they got to log in to the manufacturer's website to get to cut sheets, troubleshooting guides, and all that stuff. So it's not a simple process when you're on a ladder out in the field and like, oh, let me stop what I'm doing and I'll go get my laptop and connect and go get the PDF. Now, some techs circumvent that, right? And they download and they had a Dropbox account, and the other techs had, there's probably 10 different ways each technician was like saving documents on their phone. But the problem is updating them and onboarding new techs is like, it just needs to be an easier way to get to this stuff. And we're all on our phones 90% of the time anyway. So it just makes sense to put it on a mobile device. And that's just kind of how it started growing. Like Brian said, out of control.
It sounds like if there's basically an easier way for them to do their job better, like they're going to find whatever that path is. And if that path happens to be a Glide app, then that's what they're going to use. And it was that you had hit on, creating something that was really useful. And
yes,
off they went.
Yes.
So let's talk through that a little bit about that evolution for Techstar. You started off as this very specific use case, but then it's become so much more since then. What is it? So backing up a second, what does Techstar do today? The app today, what does that cover?
Well, one part is we actually started moving forward by putting YouTube videos. I mean, we've become where YouTube, we would do 2-minute YouTube videos on training or how to troubleshoot a device. And we actually have contact information in there. We actually have site information. As Cliff mentioned, spec sheets. I mean, it has evolved into now that we are actually hosting our company newsletter within Techstar. We have we have town hall meetings, sort of like company meetings, video meetings. And it is growing phenomenally because, again, it's all about the interactions. The C-level sees the Google Analytics. And once they see that, it just grows. Now, what happened very early on, Cliff had an idea of saying, hey, why don't we add a section where the technicians can actually ask for features, things that we really don't know that they need at this point. And they did that. And that information started coming in, and the app all of a sudden became alive, and it became their app. And we started just actually adding those features and those requests. I mean, and again, this is, typically on a mobile app, when you're doing that, and you get a feature request, man, you're not about to give them anything, in the next 3-6 months or whatever. We were able to actually meet those requests almost like within the same day or a couple of days out. Yeah, and that's kind of insane when you think about that from a old coding style method of developing apps.
Yeah.
What does that
we
look
let
like?
them start building basically we just, after the simple app, they were just telling us what they wanted in there, and we were just responding to feature requests. And so
when you're adding those features, is it are you doing anything to like corral all those requests in the back end, or using anything to track those requests as they're coming in? How are you tackling those feature requests from the users?
One way I know that Cliff set up was we set it up to where when the feature request came in, we would get an email. And in those emails, whenever those at our company, we actually have to track what we do every day. So once those requests came in within our CRM, we would go ahead and create a task for that particular part. But again, most cases, a lot of that stuff was just almost instant,
Yeah.
and that again, when the technicians saw us responding so quickly to their request, it made that connection between us. Because what happens in the field, a lot of those new guys, even though Cliff and I hold different positions, we're like the top tier techs that they still will call. And we became so unavailable to them, but they saw that connection through the apps as, oh my God, here's this feature request or whatever. And it happened so quickly and they just loved it.
Yeah. And it sort of, you get other ideas. Like a simple contact list, you start realizing everyone's got their personal cell phone and they're all entering everyone's phone number in manually. So we're like, why don't we just have make a users list of all the employees? So anytime a new employee is onboarded, they're automatically added to the app. And then if anybody needs to contact somebody in the engineering department or admin or the other departments, it's all in one centralized location. And then it kind of came into like, well, we need to improve some processes in-house to centralize more things. So that way, it's all in one place. It almost like the features started growing into fixing internal problems because they needed to be centralized so that they could be in the apps. The data could be in the app centralized.
Oh, that's awesome. So there would be like a request for something in Techstar, and then that would be like a send you down the rabbit hole of oh, well, we have this existing process or this other thing that actually we need to kind of improve this process in order to bring this into Techstar.
Yep.
Yes.
That's crazy. That's really cool. I love hearing that sort of impact. So out of all the things that you've added to Techstar since launching, and it hasn't been a long time, right? Like when did Techstar first launch?
It's about a year and 3 months ago, somewhere around there. It's a little over a year old.
Okay, so in that time, you went from the Department of Disruption forms. You have an idea for an app. You ship something really simple, and here we are a year later, and it's kind of this everything app within the organization. Is that accurate?
Yes. And here's the funny story is that when we created sort of like, let's say we were about maybe 6 months in, and our actual CEO did a demonstration of the app at another company, and they saw it and they immediately wanted a version of it for themselves because they saw the impact that it was having with us, and they're in the same business that we're in. So they saw they immediately wanted to actually have their own app. And, again, from the feature sets, like I said, the YouTube videos, the company newsletter, our standards package, there is so much that's in there because it, like Cliff always talks about, is centralizing information. It is all there. And again, I think that even now we've actually hired 2 people to actually help become, they're actually becoming a part of our Glide team internally.
So you have a Glide team now within Lone Star, just working on Glide apps.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. That's fantastic. So I'm curious, out of the features that you've added, Cliff, I'll start with you. Favorite feature? What is it?
Just me being an old school tech, it's really the original feature. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff we can do, but when you're out in the field and you're in a meeting with an engineer, an architect, or you're building a hospital or a school, and they're trying to rough in back boxes and put conduit in, and they need to know the right stuff to put in the wall. Those conversations can get kind of lengthy when you're not talking with visual cues. So to be able to like tell them, hey, I need a code blue button, and they're like, what's that? It's because some people don't know. And you can go in the app and actually pull the button up and drill into the cut sheet, and then literally email them the cut sheet from the app, and they have a picture of it and it says what size box is required. That usually raises some eyebrows, and then they're like, can I have access to that app? Well, and now you got the engineer and the architect asking you to, make a version of the app for them or give them a login. So but the text, like you saved me 15 minutes of in this meeting because I could just answer that question and they can move on to the other vendor. And because they may be talking about plumbing, electrical, flooring in that meeting, and they can just move past us nurse call guys or us school guys and then talk to the other people at the table. So when they tech comes back and tells you something like that, you're like, wow, I just saved 15 minutes here or 30 minutes here times X amount of people that are out in the field. Like how much how much is that improving our relationships with our customers and the contractors we're dealing with? And then that goes under, no one ever sees that, but it gives us a lot more credibility as a company whenever they know we're professional like that.
What I really like about that, what you've said is, here's a solution that you've built in an app, but then the ripple effects of that carry on for so far down to that interaction, that moment in time, interacting with a customer on the ground in the field as a result of something that you may have done, heck, months ago, building something in the app.
Yes, there's probably things that it's doing now that we don't know about. It's just, it just goes unspoken.
Right.
But we definitely know when people, user activity and how many people actually use the app. And so it makes it nice. We kind of gamified part of the app too. That's another thing we did was, when you log in, it kind of like, it's gamified. So the people that use the app the most rank up inside the app and they get a badge. So if you never log in, you're like on rank 0. But the more you click around in the app, we've got some Easter eggs in there that count things in the app. So you'll get a count up inside the app, and then it ranks you up to another level until you get to a Techstar, and then you max out at Techstar. But that's where the UI comes in, where you can get like a badge on your profile. And a lot of this stuff, when we first got into it, was inspired by Jack Vaughn, Robert Patillo. I don't want to butcher Robert's last name.
Yeah.
Robert Petito, if you're watching this on YouTube.
Yes.
Bobby has a lot of great stuff.
Man, I'll tell you,
a lot of great stuff.
That is really the reason that we kind of like got guided to Glide, if you want to say that. It was the community and the people and the videos and what was going on around Glide was like, oh, this is a really good community, because a lot of some of the other stuff we were messing with didn't have the community. And you're trying to fix a bug in your app, and you can go on YouTube and communicate with somebody or go on the forum, and somebody's answering you back within 5 minutes or 10 minutes from the other side of the world. It's really cool to get in the forums and help people out or find a fix.
Yeah, it is a real treasure trove. And for anybody tuning into this live or afterwards, the Glide community, if you're just getting started with Glide, you're looking for advice, we have an amazing group of users, experts, pros who are awesome at helping you through that. So definitely check out the community. Brian, I want to flip over to you. Your favorite feature in the Techstar app, what is it and why?
Hands down, the actual inclusion of YouTube videos. Everything in my life, if I want a new barbecue recipe, YouTube. If I'm working on my vehicle, YouTube. So to give them something that they were used to, and then, again, the YouTube videos were not super long, but they answered questions that we all have as technicians. And so the YouTube aspect of it, to me, was the actual part that I love the most. And, and then we got to do some cool things by, integrating some MetaHuman videos with it as well. So our technicians are so busy that we were using one technician for all of our videos. And it was just, we didn't want to take away from too much of his time. So we started using MetaHumans in our YouTube videos. And now our YouTube library is amazing. And again, those videos are there for technicians until the technology changes. So for me, it was absolutely the YouTube integration, and also the ability to get feedback. You can, one of the things that we traditionally do is we buy software, and the software doesn't really meet the needs, and being able to have that connection and let the app and let the users design it themselves by making those requests. Now I've seen it in other apps and other ideas, but just to be able to actually give them something back so fast, that has been incredible. So my two are the YouTube and just the actual integration. The interaction with the technicians.
You mentioned MetaHuman a couple times.
Yes.
So could you clarify what you mean by MetaHuman?
Okay, so we utilize another company to create these scripts that we write about particular parts and things that we have within the app. Once we create those videos, and again, those videos are only maybe to 1 to 3 minutes long. And so once that video is created in that other software, we'll actually upload it to YouTube. And now we can actually utilize that for training the technicians. I mean, at some point, there were technicians that thought that those metahumans were actually employees because they seemed so knowledgeable about the product. They had no idea. And we never told them that that's what they were. But that's where that's where that idea came from. I think Cliff came up with the idea and we went from there with it.
Yeah, that was early in before anybody really knew what all these metahumans are now. But now there's 3 or 4 companies out there that you could sign up with and just type a script in, or go, write you a script through ChatGPT, and then plug it in as a metahuman, pick your character. You could stylize the background, and then it'll automatically speak your video, and then you can upload that to YouTube, and then brand it and do whatever you want outside. But you got a custom training library of videos after that, as long as you have the content to write the scripts.
You mentioned ChatGPT. Yeah, this is a beautiful segue to my next question. What are you looking at adding to the Techstar app next? What are you thinking about?
Oh, let me tell you, this is a favorite for me. The OpenAI ChatGPT is game changer for us because, again, one was to be able to give a centralized location for all the PDFs and the manuals in the field. But again, a lot of times they're on their cell phones. They're not on their computers or their iPads. They're on their cell phones. So opening up a 400-page PDF while you're in the field, it can be a little bit tough, going through that manual on your phone. But now integrating the AI aspect of it to be able to actually just go in and ask a question and actually get that answer back, instantaneously. I want to go back and be a technician now because I'd be a Techstar. But that's what's on our horizon, and what I'm excited about is just the added AI portion of
it. I completely agree. That is a definite game changer.
All right, I got a follow-up question, Cliff, to your favorite feature. Just loading up all that data into the app. How did you do it? What was the approach to getting all that data out of all these different sources into one spot?
The first part of that question was finding the data. So that kind of what I was telling you earlier, the ripple effect of like trying to say, well, who's got the employee directory? Oh, well, a little piece of it's over here and somebody else has this piece. So finding it was really the key. And that's what kind of like created some internal, process change. So it's like, okay, we don't have a good process to centralize this stuff. Let's clean that up. But when we first got into it, we were just hand pecking everything in. That's it. We already knew the product lines. We knew the manufacturers. We knew where to get certain pieces of information. So it was more us learning how to work in the editor and put the data in the right places and keep everything clean. Name, part number, description. A lot of the stuff's on the spec sheet already. We just copy the columns over and enter the data. But where the fun starts is really getting into the interface piece and cleaning up the pictures and the graphics, because a lot of the data you're putting in there, you can make a really cool app, but if your pictures all look like clip art and they're all unformatted and cleaned up, your app starts looking real bad. So you really need to go in there and prototype and get a flow going, and then go into Canva or Adobe or whatever graphic tool you use and start formatting what's going to be in your table cleanly. If you want a certain color, a certain look, you can do that all outside Glide, but then bring the images back in and get a really good interface for your end user.
I noticed that with some of the apps that you showed me when we were in Palm Springs, and also in our next session when we get into some hands-on demos of apps that these guys have built, you do a really good job of creating these assets elsewhere and then bringing them in. And I feel like a lot of Glide users don't think about that. The fact that you can go somewhere else, create the assets, bring them in, and make your app look completely different from another user's, even if a lot of the components that you're using are the same or similar. It can look and feel like something completely different.
We think of it like, okay, we're putting the ingredients together to build a cake, to bake a cake, and we've got a base cake, and we build the foundation, and then the icing is all the buttons and what the user is actually interfacing with. So how do you want to use, do you want to use an inline list, or do you want to use cards? Well, if you use cards, okay, well, how do you want to lay it? Do you want it to be buttons, or do you want to use images as buttons? There's so many different possibilities, but you can get very creative creating very custom buttons, and then just putting those in. We kind of like, let's get the prototype working first and make sure the flow and functionality is correct. And then once we got a good feel for what we're going to do, then we'll go over and then start actually putting the time in to do the graphics and, the look and feel, what colors do we want to use? Do we want to use a 60-30-10 rule where that, like in graphic design, you may want to weight colors for one certain flow 60% of the time, and then 30% of the time another color, and the 10% is kind of like that action button you want to use. But there's so many tools out there that you can put in, and you can kind of get creative on the fonts too, because you can actually build images that have a button or a font in there that makes your app a little bit, make it pop, and you don't have to worry about typing it in a text box. You just make it in the image, and it gives it a whole different look and feel to your app.
I love this little pro tip that we've snuck in here. Brian, from your side, any advice or pro tips? It's a hard one to follow from Cliff, but do you have any advice or pro tips for other Glide users?
Well, this may be a little bit deep. Cliff is definitely, again, he's that UI guy, and I lean on him a lot for that. But talking about getting data into the app, into the rows, one of the ways that I was super excited about it was the actually talking to our major distributor and letting them know they saw a demonstration of Techstar, and it blew them away. And so, the talks began about creating an API that posts those manuals right into the Glide app, and developing that. So, now again, APIs, a lot of people run from that because they think, oh my God, I don't know how to program an API, but Glide makes it so simple, to actually make a connection and to add rows into an app. So if you, from a pro level, if you get in there, adding manuals or links or whatever through an API becomes, just a click of a button to get the information into the app itself.
I love that. I love that. Hopefully we'll be able to dig into some of those hands-on in our next session when we start looking at some apps. I'm going to flip over to some questions we got from attendees who registered for the session. The first one is actually from the chat. This came from Bobby, asking about what you're using as the data source for that product catalog. What are you using for that?
The data sources. So for us, we have, each product line has, say, it depends on the product, but it could have 10 PDF documents, or it could have 75. It just, some products that we sell and support aren't that big, and the others have massive amounts of parts. But we had to provide those spec sheets when they build a hospital or a school. They spec certain parts and pieces. So when we actually do our drawings and submit what we're actually going to install in the school, we actually have to submit product cut sheets with our submittals and drawings of how we're going to cable and wire up the building. An engineer has to actually sign off on that and approve what we're going to install before we order a single piece of material. And so it was more about collecting those cut sheets from the manufacturer that we're already giving to the engineering firms, and putting those in a digital format inside the app. So,
and then for within the app, for organizing all of this, is it connected to a Google Sheet? Are you using Glide tables? What's your data structure?
We started with Google Sheets, and then we actually just migrate. We just started saying that we're just going to put it in tables. It's I can't even remember. It was just easier to build a Glide table and not have to fight the Google Sheet, because like if you're in there working and you like delete a row, you have to go over to the Google Sheet and delete the row. So we're like, it's just easier to when y'all upgraded the data editor, it was way easier to work in. I mean, we started this a year and a half ago, and the data editor now is amazing. So it's just easier just to start as a table, unless you're importing a bunch of information from something. But in our case, we had to convert PDFs into a table in rows and in columns. But if you were pulling external data in, it would make sense to have it already in a Google Sheet or in Excel or Airtable or somewhere else, and you pull that whole set in. But the manufacturer doesn't have it in that format for us to do it that way. So we had to like basically do each sheet at a time and pull that in. Which is good in a way, because some of the parts aren't needed by the techs. If there's a list of parts of 300 parts, we may only use 100 of them all the time. We don't need all 300 in there. So it kind of kept it clean, and we only put parts in that they were using in the field.
It sounds like this whole exercise, and it goes back to what you were saying before, right? About processes internally, like through building this application, it's forced you to look at other places where you can make some improvements, or like maybe we don't need to give all this information to the techs. We can give them just what they need, because that's all we actually use when we're implementing projects.
Yes.
It's really cool. Another question here from Anthony. What mistakes did you make while building the app, and what did you learn along the way?
Well, this kind of goes back to like the tip or the pro tip. When you're actually building in Glide, hands down, you really want to focus on what need are you want to meet? What are you aiming to do? Make it simple and follow that need, because what happens is once you get in it, you get so excited and you start designing and adding on, and you really are getting outside your map of what you created. And that would be like, for instance, not having some type of documented flow chart or flow path or something like that, and you're just building without that, you could end up actually getting down the road, and say, oh, you know what? And it's like, I really wanted to build a relational table to do, to access this information, and I wish I would have, done that back ahead of time. So my biggest thing is, like, when we first started, we look back on this as, my God, man, can you imagine if we'd have done these things when we first started, and we didn't, believe it or not, as much experience as both of us have, neither one of us drew a diagram of anything. We just went nuts. I mean, it was just nights and nights and nights of like, oh my God, man, can you do, oh my, and before you know it was just boom. And now, traditionally, when you build a mobile app, you got to have this thing documented. You really want to meet those needs. And so that would be one tip I would say, is when you start out, really focus on writing down what that need is. And then, like Cliff mentioned earlier, meet that need and then go back and look at trying to make it look prettier.
It's a great pro tip.
Yep.
Stay focused on your users' needs.
Yes.
Yep. What's the job to be done? That's you just got to keep going back to that. That's the key. You're building a custom app that does one or two things really well. You're not. most apps you download do like 100 things. You only use like 10% of the features. So why do you need all those other features? We're building custom apps that do things, really good for the job to be done. Which makes navigation and the clicking through them and getting to things faster, because you don't have all this stuff in the way. Like, I got to click past an inventory app or a sales forecast or this or that, so
That's a great piece of advice. Love that. Last question here, and then we'll wrap up. When you start dealing with a lot of users, the complexity around roles, how are you guys working with that? Do you have a lot of different roles and permissions in the Techstar app?
Go for it, Cliff.
Yeah. We've kept it really simple in the Techstar app. So it's more of accessing the information and reading the information. We don't have a lot of flows that require only certain people to get to certain information. And we don't have information in there that only one department can see. It's more of a company-wide, anything we put in there, anyone in the company can see, and there's no hidden pieces. But we do understand the need. We've got some other apps where there are definite user roles. There's admin roles. There's, you can do visibility filters or filter data based on that user role. So they only see the pieces of information that you have in your table that you want them to see. So Glide makes it very easy to do that, to set up user roles and to basically, if you build a table and it's a bunch of sales volume and you only want one department to see their sales volume and another department to only see theirs, it's an easy visibility rule right there in the Glide data editor. So it comes back to what Brian was saying. What's the job to be done? You need to map out your user roles and say, if you build a tab on your app and you only want one type of user to see it, you need to map that out and then test it, and make sure that you're building something to what you documented.
That's more great advice. What I love about this session is that we have all of these little bite-sized tips that I can't wait to pull out and share with the community, because you guys have dropped so much knowledge during the session. But unfortunately, we're at time, so that's it for us. Thanks to everybody who joined us this afternoon. Thank you all for taking part in the conversation. There were some questions we weren't able to get to. But don't worry, we've got a recap coming. This live session is going to be available on demand. It's one of the beautiful things about YouTube Live. And we are going to slice it and dice it and tighten it up as a highlight reel. That'll go out to everybody who registered. But what I'm most excited about, we're going to have these two back next week for our next event, Build with Glide, where we're going to do a little bit of show and tell with you guys. You guys have started a Glide agency. I am so excited to talk about that and see some of the stuff that you've built. So if you want to check that out, glideapps.com/events, you'll see all of our upcoming events. And until then, have a great weekend. Glide on, my friends. Glide on. Have a great weekend. See you next time. Ciao.